Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Page Turners Plus. We always encourage you to follow us on our Facebook and YouTube pages, Page Turners Plus. The last time you heard from us, we reviewed Myriam Chancy's What Storm, What Thunder. Today, we have Myriam Chancy with us, and we'll be interviewing her. Welcome, Myriam.
Thank you so much for having me and for reviewing the novel. I appreciate it.
Yes, we really appreciate your presence. To start off with the questions, we have Francine. Francine?
Thanks, Roger. Hello, everybody. So happy to have you here again. So, Miriam, we're going to jump right in by asking why are all the narratives delivered in the first person except for Sarah and Leopold?
It's funny, considering that question, I had to actually really think, are they all in first person? Which goes to speak to the fact that when you write a novel, often not all your choices are deliberate.
Mm,
You're not always thinking, I'm going to have so many narrative voices in the first person, third person. And actually, I started out with 12 narrative voices. And I think, if I think back, well, 12 plus one, so actually 13, which is kind of a mystical number. So 12 because the earthquake is called Douze in Port-au-Prince. And my working title for the novel was Douze. And the plus one is it sounds like imbalance, but actually is to create a sort of balance with that number. And so some of those characters disappeared, not from the story, but in the course of putting the narrative together as a holistic whole. And some of those voices were in the third person. So, for example, Loco, the rainwater man who rescues Sarah, the young mother who lost her children, was one of those voices. He's since gone on to appear in a external version of a novel in a journal called Room out of Canada, and
Mhm.
also in an anthology in Montreal. But the larger answer to that question is that as I wrote the narratives, sometimes you start out in one narrative voice, you start out in third person limited, let's say, or you start out in first person, and then as you understand the character more fully, that voice shifts. So, for example, somebody like Sarah could not, for me, be written in first person because she is alienated from herself to such an
mm,
extent. But if I were to have written her internally, first of all, I think it would have been very painful because as a writer, you're writing in that first person and you become that person. But also because it just didn't make sense for that character. She's split off from herself, so her story could only appear in that third person narrative. Um, with some of the other characters in the first person, maybe Richard would be a good example of why I chose first person in some of the other instances. Richard, one of my editors calls Richard, deliciously narcissistic, you know. So only a first person narrative could capture that level of narcissism and
yeah.
lack of understanding of anything else
Mhm.
around them. But then on the other hand, you have a character like Malou who knows everyone and wants to tell her story. And so she's a very extroverted kind of person. And so it also made sense to have a first person voice for her. And then I think with some of the other narratives, they are in the first person, but what I do with that first person is a little different. So, for example, somebody like Jonas is in first person, but you're not sure whether he's alive or not. He's sort of in between, and he has that lack of consciousness that a child has, but he also has a spiritual quality. And so a first person kind of stream of consciousness voice was ideal for him. So I was thinking less in terms of first and third and more what was more effective to get the voice across, and that was realistic to who they were and to their condition at the moment that they're being written, within the
Excellent.
larger story of the earthquake.
And I think we'd all agree that you wrote each narrative so well that
Thank
we
you.
each one was completely different, and we could really like identify with the voice of that particular person as they were telling their story. I actually have a bit of a follow-up question since we're talking about the narratives.
Sure.
How did you, or did you decide to structure them chronologically? Like,
Yeah, I wish I could show you all my different. I still have them, all the brouillon. I'm forgetting the word in English, but
draft, draft,
the
draft.
yeah, the drafts of the order.
Right.
So I have
Ah.
multiple drafts of the order, with the names crossed out, with the name, because the way I wrote this novel was different from other novels I've written, and what I'm working on now, where I was more methodical with the chronology, or how I wanted, time to pass in the novel. With this one, I knew who my cast of characters were, that those 13 from the very beginning, and I knew their ages. Most of the time, I knew their names, I knew their occupation, and I just wrote them through as they came. So, for example,
Mm.
Jonas was the first person I wrote.
Right.
Sarah came much later. Richard was somewhere in the middle, where he's still somewhere in the middle of the novel. So there was this kind of writing on inspiration. And whenever I felt like I had really captured the voice of a character, I never wrote a character through unless I really knew who they were and I felt I had the voice. If I felt I didn't have a voice, I didn't write them. Like, I waited and I would work on somebody else. And then when I started putting the order together, so it's actually, the final order is very close to what I had originally, but with a few changes. The original order actually had Sarah at the very beginning, not Malou.
Mm.
And readers will, or writers will tell you that they have what are called beta readers, like readers who are not specialists or editors, who you might, a friend, or. And I had a friend who, an American woman who happened to have been in Haiti at the time of the earthquake, and had just had a child, and she couldn't, and had the child she had just given birth when the earthquake happened, or the child was very, under a year old, if I remember correctly. And so she knows that she just, was one of the lucky ones, in terms of not losing that child and being able to leave. And so when she read that first draft, that first chapter just stopped her. It made it
Mm.
impossible for her to continue reading. And so even though Sarah is still close to the beginning, I moved her back a little bit because I didn't want anyone to feel like they couldn't get through the novel. And this is where it became clear to me that I needed a character who could walk the reader through, who could at least invite them in. And that became Malou. And then I decided that Malou would also get the last word. So that's why she's the only character that has two chapters, because she invites you in and then she closes, the book. But she gives you a sense of continuity and a sense of possibility. And also, she's an older woman. She's in her 70s, and she's from a class of people who are not often addressed, or given authority in their own stories. And so this is why she has the authority here. Um, but the order changed over time. I spent about 5, 6 years working on the novel, and then it went through an editorial process for another, two different editorial processes: Canadian editor and then the American editor. And so there were a lot of opinions, but I had the last word. And what was interesting to me is that I came very close to my original order. And then finally, maybe you might have noticed that there is a sort of loose structuring around camp life, so that you have more people, progressively more people in the camps as the novel progresses, which gives you a kind of feeling of moving through the event and then the aftermath of the event.
Eric?
Yes, thank you, Miriam, for joining us, and congratulations on the award that you won last week
Oh, thank you.
for the book.
Yes, yes.
Very happy for you in that. So my question is similar to uh, Francine's follow up. Why did you want to write about or tell the stories of these particular
Mhm.
protagonists?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a question I get sometimes. Like, why didn't I focus on one particular person, or excuse me, family group? Because there are three family groups in the novel, in 10 narrative voices. Um, My feeling was, and I spent many years right after the earthquake, weeks after, into months, which turned into 3 years, giving a lot of talks, as a scholar, as an expert on Haitian women and children's condition, talking about best practices, how were people to, outside of Haiti to assist, locals or to, aid in ways that were constructive to what people wanted inside. And one of the things that became very clear to me over time is that the international response, but even people's immediate personal responses to the earthquake, was such that there wasn't a realization that there wasn't, first of all, a unified voice in Port-au-Prince as to what should come next, but also that the experience of the earthquake itself was lived differently
Mm,
within, even within family groups, you
mhm,
know. And even as I went back to Haiti in those years, the conversations I was a part of or just listened to, everyone had a different opinion. And people were always comparing notes, even those who had lived through the earthquake, comparing notes as to what they heard, what they saw, how they felt, what they lost, even within the same family. This happened within my extended family. So
mm,
when I came to writing the novel, my idea was that I needed to capture as many different point of views as possible to reflect the reality of what things are like on the ground, what people went through, and how their experiences during and after might have been very different. What they might have wanted might have been very different. What they've suffered might have been very different. And I wanted to give a sense of Haiti as a place of multiplicity, that you can't
mm,
just say it's one thing. There are many things going on. And also, I wanted to
yes.
capture the fact that there are many classes, because of the impoverishment of the country. There is a sense that people think, oh, it's just a country of poverty, which in many ways it is, but we have a class structure, working class, middle class, upper class, elite, and I wanted to capture all of those layers in the novel. Some of that is captured through the marketplace where everybody has to come through. The elites may not come down from their chariots, but certainly they send people in to get what they need. And then you get that sense through Malou also of, the crossing of paths. So, and then I also wanted to capture generations, from the very young, the 11-year-old Jonas or the 15-year-old Tafia to the elderly, like Malou or Loco, and those in between. And so it was really to try to give a rounded view of the situation and of the society. But I chose to have as many narrative voices, and also from different walks of life. And I think finally, I would say that when you consider that upwards of 300,000 people perished,
Mm.
and 1.7 million were directly affected in terms of housing insecurity and food insecurity, I had to find a way to capture as many voices as possible. So,
Mm,
in my mind, each of the 10 represents some small part of those 300,000 whose names we'll never know, unless
mm,
you lost an individual yourself, and whose stories will never be told.
mm. Wow.
I mean, and that's one of the things that I really loved about the novel was that diversity within the people that you choose to write about.
Mhm,
And my question is kind of similar, but I hope it makes sense.
mhm.
Um, one side of it is, did you choose the characters, or did the characters choose you? Writers often talk about hearing the voices and
Mhm,
just telling the
Yes.
story that they heard.
Mhm,
Was that the case here? And then the flip side of that is,
mhm.
are any of these characters based on real people that you may have known or came across in the research or writing?
Yeah,
Sorry, speaking of about the earthquake.
sure.
There's a third part, but I'll leave that for last. I think we'll start
maybe
with those
I'll
two for now.
maybe I'll answer it in maybe I'll answer your third question in the process of answering the first two. So the first question was, did they come to me or did they choose me or did I choose them? Well, I'm fond of Toni Morrison's, way of talking about writing, which I think is mine as well, where she says that the characters speak to you and compel you to write
mm,
them. And I think that's true. I started working on the novel after a trip to Trinidad and after a visit with Leroy Clark, the painter.
Mm.
and who had been painting a cycle on Haiti. But he had started
Yeah.
in 86 and stopped, and then started again in 2010 after the earthquake, and then continued. And I think at the end had upwards of 111 paintings. When I was there, I saw in the 70s. And when I was there, I started weeping. He wasn't there yet. I hadn't met him. They had put out all the paintings for me to see. And I started weeping in the space. And he came up to me and he said, you know, what are they saying? What are they
Hmm.
saying? And we had a conversation about what I felt and what I thought was being said to him. And then I went home and I reflected on this experience. You know, why am I telling, you know, the great Leroy Clark what his paintings mean? And I just sat down and all these, you know, it makes me feel like weeping because he wasn't there to see the novel and when it
Mm.
came out. But I just sat, you know, I remember I got home like on the weekend, and by Thursday I wrote out all the characters' names or and occupations, their ages.
Wow.
It all came very clearly.
Mm.
Because what had happened for me was that in those years, and this answers the second part of your question, in the years of giving talks, often people would come up to me after the talks and commiserate with me about what had happened, you know, who they had lost, what their experience had been like. And we would, and sometimes, you know, my talks were always in English. Sometimes people didn't understand what I had said, but a little bit like when you all introduced yourselves at the beginning today, they knew the essence of what I had said, and they would speak to me in Creole or in French. Um, and you know, your second question was, were any of the stories inspired by you know, meetings during the talks and so forth? Actually, no. But what they did do, and I think this is what I crystallized for me when I was in Leroy's studio, is that I realized that people had been talking to me because they expected that I would write something on the earthquake. And I hadn't perceived that I had a responsibility as a writer to do that. I
Mm.
really felt like I didn't want, because there were so many people who had nothing to do with Haiti who just started to jump on the bandwagon
Mm.
of the Haiti earthquake. And I didn't want to be one of those people. So I was actually refusing to write on the novel, on the earthquake as a fiction writer, and only doing like political pieces, you know, about best practices and so forth. And what I realized is that people were talking to me as a kind of charge, like, remember this, you know, remember this happened, remember, you know, and I was also going back, you know, back and forth. Of course, I knew a lot about the earthquake. I had a lot of accumulated knowledge, but there's nothing that strictly came out of the story that I heard. One of the things I will say is that when I was in the Caribbean after the earthquake with my last novel, Loneliness of Angels, I I had come across a young man who knew I was Haitian, asked me if I was Haitian, and told me that he had survived the fall of the Montana and that it had changed his life. And then he
Mm.
walked away. That was it. That was the extent of the conversation. Didn't want to talk about it, but he wanted me to know this. And he inspired Leopold. Now, the young man in question was not Trinidadian,
Or a
but he
drug dealer?
inspired.
Uh,
Excuse me?
or a drug dealer?
No. Well, I don't know. I don't know.
And I suppose that sort of answers the next question that we had for you, which would be, why did you choose to highlight the historical link between Powerman in Trinidad and Haiti?
Yeah, probably we were probably when you hear me talking about Leroy, then you realize I spent some time in Trinidad, and a mutual friend, uh, um, Raul Gibbons, introduced us, and he was the one who took me to, who's a playwright, and he's the one who introduced me to Perriman during one of my stays there. I was also writer in residence at UE, and
Mm.
so I visited Perriman and was offered a soup that's a lot like our soup joumou, which is the national dish of Haiti that gets served on January 1st as a celebration of independence. And also, Raw was working on a program where people who spoke Creole, which is very close to Haitian Creole, elders were going to introduce younger people to the Creole. And so, and I also I learned a little bit about the 70s revolution and the ties to Haiti at that time. And so then I realized there was an opportunity with the novel to capitalize in a positive way on this connection, because often, when people think about the earthquake, they think of it as an isolated incident. It happened over there. Although I've heard since, from readers that people heard or felt the earthquake, although as far as Jamaica, and in some other parts of the Caribbean, and remember. They just didn't realize what was happening until, a few days later. And so I wanted people to feel an investment, that this is a regional issue. And we know that where those plates meet runs right through the Caribbean basin. And as far as I know, up the Florida Panhandle as well. And so one of the things that was talked about at the time is that people shouldn't just be thinking poor Haiti. They should be thinking about what could happen throughout the region over time, in terms of preparedness, and in terms of having a solidarity around, catastrophes like this, which will occur in the future.
Thank you for that. And I think it was really important because last week we were mentioning
Mm.
that many people in the Caribbean, sort of not directly, they didn't directly feel the earthquake, but they felt
Mm.
the sort of aftershocks where,
Mm.
there was the humanitarian crisis, and many people in the Caribbean sort of rallied, to put together donations.
Right.
Not to reveal my age, but I was in primary school when this happened,
Mm.
and I remember that they had a drive where we could donate like non-perishable items at school,
Mm.
and so I think it was all of us were connected in some way to this incident. Francine, you want to jump back in here?
Yeah, before I ask my next question, though, I will just follow on from the idea of it being a region-wide issue and the connection. I think when we discussed the novel last week, we all spoke about the fact that we enjoyed how much you drew in other bits of the Caribbean in the
Mm.
story, other historical facts, the revolution in Grenada, Michael Manley, that sort of thing. So we
Hmm.
definitely got that, we're all together Caribbean vibe while reading the book, and we
Wonderful.
all appreciated that very much. So the stories told are somewhat traumatizing, to put it
Sure.
frankly, and we appreciate that there must be a delicate balancing act to communicate these serious events and the despair without actually alienating the audience. You mentioned,
Mm.
that's part of the reason that you moved Sarah's story from the beginning. Did you find it difficult to strike a balance in being able to authentically tell the story while yet not traumatizing and alienating the reader?
Um, it's something I think a lot about as a writer. And I know that there are moments, when I read other writers' work on historical events, whether it's in the African context or Caribbean or elsewhere, where sometimes I feel like, particular scenes of trauma go maybe a little too far, or I didn't need to know something from a perpetrator's point of view, something like that. And so what I tried to do here was be truthful, but provide a sense of what may have occurred from the point of view of a person to whom it was happening, and with the limits of what could be comfortably revealed. And I don't mean comfortably in a simple way, comfortable in the sense of what, making a reader comfortable, something like that. But in the sense that when people tell about traumatic events, there's a particular way of omitting, certain key details while still revealing what happened, you know? And so you can see this in Tafia's experience, who experiences, sexual violence in the camps, which was an everyday reality for many women and girls at the time, for a very long time, in the camps, in the IDP camps. And I couldn't gloss over that reality. I couldn't pretend it didn't happen. But I tried to find a way for Tafia to be able to tell that story without being overly graphic, but you still know what happened. And something similar And this is about balance, something similar almost happens, or to Olivier, Sarah's husband, the father, where he is exposed to that potential violence when he actually polices a camp to try to prevent such acts from occurring. And so I wanted both to show that such things did occur, but that the local population, which is true to life, also organized itself to try to secure the camps and to protect people, but that violence sometimes had no order, you know. And so I think that the balance then gets struck with remaining faithful to the voices themselves. And as you might have noticed, I have a poetic style. And so sometimes the poetic style allows you to render horrific things in a more beautiful manner without making those events beautiful, if that makes sense. So they're readable, you can experience them, and you're willing, to live with those events alongside the characters without being traumatized yourself, because the writing carries you into those places and out of them. And then I think finally, I struck a balance by always trying to demonstrate that there was love there. That there is love, love in the characters, love in the family groups, love in the even when it is unrequited in the case of Leopold, for Sonia, or Sonia for Dieudonné, um, but that it is love that actually carries people through, even in the cases of people who don't survive. You see this in Richard's ending, what he thinks about at the end of his section, and you see it with Jonas as an 11-year-old who is haunting his mother because he wants her to know that she is loved, that she will make it through, and she does.
Okay. Thank you for that. Uh, there are multiple references to NGOs, and we might say quote unquote white saviors in the text that came to
Mhm.
Haiti in the immediate aftermath of the earthquake. The question is, were you attempting to highlight that dark side of those humanitarian missions and to register your rebuke of them?
Yes. In one short answer,
Okay.
yes. A lot of my talks were on this very topic, and so I couldn't avoid it. Of course, I know that may have alienated some, some of my potential audience, because a lot of people don't realize that there are ways of, entering these spaces, and there are ways not to. And unfortunately, many of the aid structures that we have globally follow the pattern of colonial structures. They're post-colonial, but they're colonial. And so you might have noticed, with one character, Anne, that there are references to Rwanda. And so Anne is somebody who's brought up in Haiti, and she works as an architect. But at the time of the earthquake, she's actually in Rwanda working on sustainable housing there. But she recognizes that there's a kind of consonance between what happened during the genocide and what is happening, in her homeland. And that came out of the fact that when I was working on the novel, I was working on another book, which was an academic book, which had a chapter on representations of the Rwandan genocide, one of which was done by Raoul Peck, filmmaker, who also did a documentary on the earthquake called Fatal Assistance. But he had done an early film called Sometimes in April, a fictionalized account of a genocide, which stars Idris Elba actually in a breakout role, if you're a fan. But when I was, so I was working between the two, and one of the things I did as an academic was read a lot of essays about what happened in the aftermath of a genocide, written by Rwandans who had survived a genocide or who had been children and now were scholars. And one of the things they wrote about was the way in which local Rwandans were treated by NGOs after the earthquake. And I happened to had the opportunity to go to Rwanda, um, while talking about yet another book, which was on Haiti and the DR in South Africa. But I took the opportunity of going that far to stop in Rwanda and visit women's cooperatives and see what was going on and get the feel of the place, which felt a lot like Haiti when I was growing up, I have to say. And and so one of the things those Rwandan scholars taught me was to really question, the aid structures and what is going on there and why they have not assisted in places that could have really needed assistance. And of course, we can also go back to the fact that the genocide itself would have been prevented if the UN had been tasked to do what they should have done, right, which is to prevent death. And a similar situation arises in Haiti, where the UN is present, but is not an effective response team. And then, of course, there's the cholera incidents where they infected, the main water tributaries in Haiti, and upwards of 1,000 people died in the aftermath of the earthquake, and over 1 million people were affected. So, um, so I could not write a story that somehow did not talk about the aftermath of the consequences of the disastrous, aid that was provided, quote unquote. Much of it focused on tourism and on providing structures for NGO workers, as opposed to the devastated population. So, a number of 3 and 4 star hotels, all of which, by the way, are closed today, were opened in the years following the earthquake. The idea being that this would provide a trickle down economy. It didn't do that, you know. And then, as we know, right now Haiti is burning. I mean, it's Port-au-Prince is in flames in protests right now. So, even though I finished the novel, a few years ago, and it came out last year, what we are seeing today in Haiti is a consequence of that failed aid. And you have to also remember that billions of dollars, in the double digits, billions of dollars, went in and out of Haiti. How that does not, how billions of dollars of aid, and we're talking in the 20 billion, mark, does not change a society that is impoverished, is something that we really need to think about, you know. And so that's what Olivier, who's an accountant, and he's a bit of an homage to my mother, who was an accountant. Is That's why he's computing the numbers. Of course, he's avoiding his grief by computing and trying to figure out how things could be different. And this is only a few months after the earthquake, when money was already pouring in. But that's why I thought, well, an accountant could, talk truthfully about, you know, where the money has come from, where it's going, and what could have made a difference.
Mm. Wow, thank you. That's the real compelling assertions there.
You're welcome.
Kesima?
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll jump in with a question. I think one thing I will say before starting the question, because I hope it makes sense. Again, is I think I found the novel sort of devastating. I've visited Haiti twice, and each time I've gone, I've had a wonderful time. Really enjoyed it. Traveled around. Um, I really had the chance to kind of explore it a little bit. I visited the Cap Haïtien, as well as Jacques Camel and Port-au-Prince, Saint
Mhm.
Marc,
Mhm.
also Pete, so like a really small border town.
Mhm.
Um, and yet, one thing I found with the novel, and it's always been a stunningly beautiful place, just
Yes.
heartbreaking, wrench, like mouth opening, like wow, is this really a real place on earth? Like it's so beautiful, so beautiful.
I'm so glad to hear you
Um,
say that.
no, I recommend it highly that everyone should visit Haiti. I mean,
Yeah.
perhaps not right this second.
Not right now,
Um,
but one
um,
day,
yeah, when hopefully
when it's
it's
restored to the people.
exactly, exactly. It's just a wonderful place. Worth visiting. You know, so rich in history and yeah, real much easier to travel around than you might think, as
Mhm.
well as what I would say. Um, and that's something that comes out, I think, in your novel that there's so much death and destruction and despair on the one hand, but there's no trauma porn, as you kind of think alluded to earlier. It's
Mhm.
not that sort of novel. You get wrenched, your heart breaks because the stories are heartbreaking, but you don't.
Mhm.
There are no excesses in your storytelling, and what you do as well. I think is really bring out the beauty, the marketplace, the people where people meet, the neighbors that watch TV together. There's a sense of a community, and those are some things that I really value. I think because as a tourist, these are things that you can't be a part of, right? If you're just
Right.
backpacking around and getting
Right.
buses. Um, and I guess the question is, why was that important to you to show kind
Oh,
of the other side of Haiti, that in the middle of all the destruction?
yeah, because those things coexist. You know, the beauty and the despair are, you know, I think at some point, speaking of something else in the novel, the metaphor I use were, you know, scissors, right? Like the two sides of the scissors. And so, um, you know, I'm always amazed at how people have a really, you know, false view of Haiti, and first of all, don't understand why Haiti is mired in the poverty it's mired in, but it has nothing to do with the population itself, right? But it goes back to the revolution and of indemnity to France, and all kinds of structures having to do with the IMF and the WHO and relationships to the United States, trade relationships, and which penalize the country over and over and over again. So there's no way of getting ahead. There's just absolutely none. And so um, I just thought, yeah, this was devastating. But I, you know, for years after, I would come across people who didn't remember that there had been an earthquake. You know, who would talk to me about a hurricane. And the novel previous to this one, Loneliness of Angels, is about the devastation of a 2004 earthquake season, which ripped through Gonaïves in the central part of the country. And so my thought would be, well, how is it that, you know, at the time when I started writing the novel, I was living in a Midwestern town in the United States of 250,000 people, you know, quarter of a million people. And here in my hometown, which, you know, of course, exceeded in 2010, the capital exceeded, I think, 2 million. Um, you know, 300,000 people disappeared in less than a minute. And my thought was, how is it that this has not registered with people? And I did the research because I was giving those talks, and found out that the Haitian earthquake was second in devastation in terms of death toll to an earthquake that had occurred in China in the 1500s. So how does this not register with people generally? And then how is it, because and in conversations I had, interviews I've had in the last year, even having written this novel and hopefully, you know, interviewers having read it, I still receive questions about, you know, what should Haitians have learned, you know, through the earthquake. And I don't think I've ever been in heard an interview with people writing about natural catastrophes saying, what did the people do, you know, to deserve, you know, this tornado season, or you know, this you know, where there's winter, like a blizzard, you know, if people were trapped in a blizzard. I've never heard of the people being, you know, of you know, we're never told, like people in Minnesota in a blizzard, you know, if their water wasn't running, that they're responsible for that water not flowing, right? So so I really wanted to move the space into the novel space, you know, for the reader, into a place of humanizing, you know, Haitians, making people feel like, well, you know, this could happen to you. Maybe not an earthquake, but maybe a tornado, maybe a cyclone, maybe a hurricane. What will you do? You know, what might you lose if this were to happen to you? And what is the range of you know, so these are the kinds of questions I would hope that the novel would raise, at the same time as also being clear that as a Haitian writer, I had to dispel, you know, the negative associations with Haiti, had to move people straight away from that. And in some ways, Malou being the ground for this, and you know, opening up with the Vodou invocation was a way to clearly indicate that I value, you know, all aspects of Haitian culture. I value our elders, and that I want the reader, you know, to be inculcated in this kind of respect for the society from the very moment they open the novel. And if they're not ready for that, it's signaled on the first page. You're not ready for this. You know, you could read something else. You know, so So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So we're basically coming to the end of the program, and for some reason, there's a thunderstorm in Trinidad at the moment. So it's quite a remarkable coincidence that we're
Yes,
speaking
what
to the author
thunder.
of What Storm, What Thunder.
Yeah.
So I think we'll give the final question to Eric. Eric?
Uh, in the chapter with Olivier speaking,
Hmm.
he makes a strong statement. He argues that the United States should pay reparations to Haiti.
Hmm.
Um, wha- would you unpack that? I mean, we don't have much time, but would you unpack it? 'Cause that's interesting to me as a scholar of Africa, but also the Caribbean, and also I read a lot about reparations and teach about reparations. So I'll just love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think you're alluding to the part where he's talking about the numbers, as I was talking about earlier, and
Mhm.
he's saying, well, if they just gave this amount to every, survive, family member of somebody who passed away, and would amount to this amount, and everybody could kind of pull themselves up into the middle classes. The history is long, and I don't think we have enough time for me to cover it, but I'll answer it in a roundabout way, which I hope will be succinct and clear, which is that you might have come across an expose that the New York Times did on the French debt to Haiti uh, a month or two ago. I can't remember the exact date.
Mhm.
And it apparently was a dossier that had been prepared for 2 years, and it conveniently avoided the US involvement in Haiti's increasing debt over time. And that was very intriguing to me. I mean, really fascinating. Also, knowing, my parents were born at the end of the US occupation in the 1930s. The US occupation lasted from 1915 to 1934, an occupation which also took place on the Dominican side, slightly different years, but overlapping, which completely destroyed any connection between the two countries when there had been a kind of unified front against US domination. So, one of the things I have to think about is why is it that, an entity as large as the New York Times is avoiding thinking about, where the impact of the U.S. Trade system, aid system, really falls into the United States court. Why they never wanted to focus on that makes me really doubt, the intent behind pointing out the French debt. The French have responsibility. Canada, actually, I'll mention Canada as a Canadian, has responsibility. The United States has responsibility because they are the chief actors in the domination of both the economic and political systems of Haiti. So I don't have enough time to disentangle all of that, but it is very clear that today in 2022, it is the United States primarily which controls the Haitian economy and politics, and they bear responsibility that goes back to what we call gunboat diplomacy of the
Yeah.
late 1800s to
Okay.
the present.
I think I hope I'm not taking your spot, Roger, but we always like to ask our authors, what's your next project? We love this book. It moved us, it delighted us, it surprised us. What can we expect from you going forward in 30 seconds because we're running out of time?
Okay, appreciate the question. I Yeah, I'm long-winded, so what can I say in 30 seconds? So I'm working on a new novel, which is about two childhood friends, two women, who learn something that destroys their friendship, and who try to reconnect at different points in their lives, and who also have relationship to the Dominican Republic, but through Haiti. And so I'm trying to negotiate that relationship through the two women, and unpacking what happened, to their friendship. I'm very excited about it. I've been writing on it feverishly since the end of the cycle with the last novel, What Storm with Thunder. But I have to say that I think What Storm with Thunder will remain my most important work as a novelist. And but I hope people will read what comes after it as well.
All right. We really appreciate that, Miriam. Thank you
Thank
for
you all.
joining us today. And For our audience, the next time you hear from us, we'll be reviewing Island of Forgetting by Jasmine Seeley. But before you go, we have a special reading for you by Miriam that takes place in a market scene. So stay tuned and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
What Storm with Thunder is the story of the 2010 Haiti earthquake, told through 10 narrative voices, 10 characters of different backgrounds, different economic status, different ages. They're from 3 family groups, and you learn about them through their experience of the earthquake, who they might have been before, what happened during the period of the earthquake for them, and if they survived, because not all of them do, what it was like after the earthquake, the immediate aftermath of the earthquake. And all of the characters are interconnected in some way. And you find them finding each other through the marketplace. And so the individual, the character who holds the whole novel together is the person who has the first part of the novel, who opens the novel, and who closes the novel, who bookends the novel, as I'd like to say. And her name is Malou. And as you might have guessed, she is a market woman. And so she sees everyone coming through that market. And I'm going to read a short section from what the experience of the earthquake was like for her. This is Malou. I watched. That's what all old market women do. We watch. But this time, the lot of us market women sprang to action, even as our bones creaked for lack of cartilage and oil. Like the others on the street, we used anything in hand we could find. Useless things like spoons and forks, the metal ends of umbrellas, as if our puny things, our fingernails, could move all that. Only the lucky were saved. Being lucky meant simply that you were closer to the surface or that fewer things blocked the way to being found. We heard people on their cell phones all up and down the street, begging frantically for help, giving directions to where they thought they were beneath the rubble within the rooms of their houses. Phones rang and we heard people answer them. Then fewer and fewer voices. The tinny, persistent ringing of cell phone tones, different songs rising like wind from underground with no answer. We heard our own voices screaming at each other, asking for help, not knowing what to do, faces covered with dust and sweat, and other things later to be determined what to do. There was nothing to do but to scream, try anything, flail our hands, scratch at the earth like my chickens when they get confused because their fresh laid eggs disappear one by one and still they lay more. Try anything and still it's too late. After the earth rose and split open, yes, I saw angels walking, but there had also been dust, white dust, everywhere, caking all objects and every moving thing. The dust came from the concrete crumbling to pieces as buildings flattened, but there were also other things mixed in, blood and bones. Had I mistaken the walking dead for angels, survivors stumbling through the debris with the same white flakes covering their bodies from head to toe that covered mine? Eventually, we, the market women, remembered our oil lamps and lit them one by one, those of us who could. Only part of the market had been crushed, the part against a wall. Still, it was impossible to tell what belonged to whom, and at that point, no one cared. We worked at freeing those we could, said prayers for the others, promising deliverance to those we could not get to give them some solace, some hope in their final moments, because salvation would soon be theirs. Then back down the street, darting back and forth, using the goods from the market to feed those working at rescue, doing what we could as we always did, our large bodies moving through the rubble as if we were land whales, made for swimming through dust-laden air, made for parting human waves. We treated everyone alike. They had become all the same, were always the same, something we had always known from our low to the ground perches, observing life like budgies, our heads wrapped in colorful scarves to keep the heat of the sun from roasting our brains, sweat slipping down our necks, draping the half moon of our chests exposed above the breasts. We fanned ourselves, but it didn't help. Shala! Heat came with a territory, but not this, not this, a different kind of heat. Sitting here under the hot sun all day, we ripen. The saints, the crooks, the foreigners, the white saviors, the bleeding hearts, they all need sustenance, and we give it to them. Close my eyes, look away, it's all the same. The need to shut everything down, slow my breathing, take in what's there to take in, let all the rest go. If only I could get rid of the images of the smell still clogging my nostrils. Ha! You would think that after so many years working in the market, nothing would offend this nose. Look what surrounds us every day. The mounds of smoldering garbage, the spoiling fruits with skins speckled with loitering flies, the leavings of dogs, the runoff of dirty water, weaving its way through the alleyways, that dense, acrid stink of urine. A marketplace is a world of colliding senses, not all of it pretty or fruitful, much of it decay, especially at the end of a day when the best of what's available is gone and all that remain are cast offs, the leftovers. This is the part of the day when those of us who work the market blend into the dust and the loam, become one with the elements, the odors of sweat and dung, the sweet sap of fleshy fruits ground underfoot, the nothing that we are, the all. We sweep up what's left of a day, knowing that striving toward perfection is beyond our reach.